everyone, can you hear me? Ooh, I can hear myself. I don't think you could see me if I stand back there, so I might stand in this little space right here to talk to you. I had a chance to talk to some of you beforehand. It was a pleasure. Very happy to be here. I'm Angela Yoakum. I work for Dell. My responsibility at Dell is all technology in support of the Dell Services segment. It's about an $8 billion business for Dell. In addition to this, I also have responsibility for all corporate technology at Dell and all the solutions in support of one of our 3 strategic pillars. It is a great job. It is a lot of fun. It's a great place to see the things that are happening inside of Dell, which is a very dynamic company, a very fast-moving company, heavy transformation activity ongoing, and we're right in the middle of it. So a lot of fun. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of the trends that I've seen in other large and medium-sized IT shops. See, part of my job is also to go out and talk to our customers. For those of you who were here last year and happened to hear me speak about the Dell story, the Dell IT story, you will have heard, but I'll just go ahead and jump to the punchline, which is Dell IT managed over the course of a couple years to take out of a $1.2 billion budget, yearly budget that is static. We started out spending about 75% of that on keeping the lights on, maintenance sort of things, and that's pretty much industry standard. We took it down to 48%. So this year, out of a $1.2 billion, Dell's spending a little over $500 million on strategic investment. So you want to talk about exciting things happening in IT? That's exciting. And it turns out that that story and how we got there resonates with our customers, which means I'm on the road talking to our customers. But that's great for me because it means that I get to talk to my counterparts leading the large IT divisions and other big companies. And it's really interesting what I'm seeing. And it's probably some of the things that you've seen as well in your own companies or perhaps in the companies of your colleagues. I'm going to talk a little bit about what those things are today, what some of the business drivers are that are causing the changes in IT, and then more importantly, for those of us interested in architecture, as I assume we all are since this is part of the architecture track, what that means to us and what we have to do to prepare to do the best job for our companies, best job for our customers, and of course for ourselves as we manage our own career going forward. So this presentation is going to go like this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the trends that I see, why I think it's happening. We're going to constantly be tying it back into the sorts of things that we should be thinking about as architects. And then what I'd like to do is just talk about the foundational capabilities that all architects must have and how what we've discussed is going to impact those capabilities and where the focus area should be. You should be thinking about that. I'd love for this to be very interactive as we go. Before we get started, how many people in here are architects? All right. All right. How many people are aspiring architects, play an architect sometime on TV, and manage architects? Manage IT divisions? All right, good. It's a good smattering. So I hope you will be interactive, and I hope this will be relevant. It should be. I should probably also tell you a little bit about my background, just so you have a context. I started out in development, like many of you did. Went to networking, large-scale networking, did some systems work, moved to leading development teams, went to architecture, then set up architecture practices, owned IT strategy eventually. I've led pretty much every shared service there is. Finally, large IT divisions, such as the one I have today. So I've had an interesting path. I think many of your paths have probably been similar. Certainly when we talk to architects, practicing architects today, you'll see a path that's fairly similar. So what's happening in IT? A few things are happening. First, I am seeing fairly pervasively IT shops are shrinking. Is this a good thing? I would argue that it is. We're seeing this shrinkage for a couple of reasons. First, other companies besides Dell have undergone massive rationalization activity in the last year or 2 years. This is part of what happens when an economic downturn comes. Everyone tightens the belt and tries to find out a way to run more efficiently. So that's happening. It's been successful. People have done a good job. IT shops are shrinking. Another reason is, of course, we're no longer necessarily running all of the capability that we need to support our business. We are, in some cases, contracting that out. It is being run elsewhere, it's being managed elsewhere, and we're more managing the integration of it. So that, of course, doesn't require as much internal IT staff. So it makes sense, right? It's easy to understand why it's happening. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean that IT is no longer important. But that's certainly going to have impact when you're thinking about architecture teams and what the makeup of architecture teams are. It's certainly easy to understand or to imagine how that might impact how we engage. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Another trend that I'm seeing is, not surprisingly, the pendulum swinging back and IT shops being decentralized. Again, we've accomplished so much in the simplification space. Business communities are needing to be more agile, and the way to do that is to bring your IT capability closer into the business lines. We're seeing that start to happen again. And that's going to have impact on your architects, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes as well. Anyone seeing either one of those two trends in your own companies? Yeah, smattering, it's starting to happen. It's going to happen more and more. It's going to happen more and more. Another thing that I'm starting to see is IT shops functioning more like product groups. Now, typically, you think about how you optimize an IT shop and how you run an IT shop. And you think about how you run a product group. And optimized for very different things, right? Very different purposes. So while you might have capability that exists that's similar, you wouldn't structure optimally the two groups the same. I'm starting to see more of a bleeding of product group-like capability into IT shops. Part of the reason for this is because IT shops are now being asked to think more about go-to-market capability. Because as one of the things I'll talk about that's happening in the business community, and certainly that y'all have seen, is in times of economic downturn and in this world where customer expectations are constantly changing, market conditions are constantly evolving, business communities are looking for any way to increase revenue, to expand portfolio, and oftentimes they turn to the technology organization and say, hey, we may sell insurance, and you may have just built something that we think we can turn around and sell to our competitors. Can you do that for us? Or service companies might say, hey, you have a good capability that you've built out in support of our internal business. We'd love to take that to market. So anyway, you're starting to see some of this, not so much as the first two trends that I mentioned to you, but I'm starting to see some of this shift in mindset inside of internal IT, and ownership of revenue-driving activity coming out of IT. That also changes considerations for architects, changes the skills you need in-house, changes the way you engage, everything about how you plan. So there are many, many things happening here. And the reason why, of course, there are many other things happening in IT, but there are several things that are happening in the business in general that I think are certainly the things that have driven a lot of the discussions you've had thus far at TechEd and that you're going to continue to have going forward. One of them is the continual change and bar raising that's happening inside of consumer expectations. So for those of you who serve consumer clients, there are so many changes that the truths that we've held for so long are just no longer in play. One thing, for example, if you're a mom and pop bakery and you decide you're going to have a web presence because that's just what's done, you put up your menu and your hours and whatever, I have some bad news for you. The people visiting that web page are going to have the same level of expectation of your website as they will of Amazon.com, Dell.com, Microsoft.com, or any multinational. The level of expectation, this consumer class expectation, is pervasive, not just on website, but in every experience that a consumer has with a business or a service provider. And that is maybe not fair, but that's just the way it is. And if you're going to compete either with other companies that are your size or perhaps much, much larger, you have to step up, and technology is often a key to that. Other truths. When we think about economic downtime, we think about, or downtime, we think about price being the most important aspect for consumers. But that's just not the case. I mean, just as often, you'll see consumers who are more interested in understanding the environmental impact of how you provide your product or service, or how your product or service is in support of their local community's best interests. These are things that are important and are wonderful to see, but difficult to predict. And so as a business, difficult to necessarily anticipate how you can provide, can meet the expectations that your consumers have. And then as an IT shop, how do you help meet those expectations that are constantly changing? Here's another one. Consumers no longer, and we know that, no one knows this better than this community, consumers no longer have to own stuff. They just need to gain access to it, right? So certainly we know that in the technology space. We no longer need to own infrastructure. We no longer need to own software. We can just gain access to it as long as we have the capability. We're happy. Same thing's true of handbags. You know, there's a company out there to allow you to rent a designer handbag for a couple of weeks instead of buying it. Probably not too many takers in this room for that sort of service, but it does exist, should you be interested. You know, what if you work for a company that is you have a bunch of car dealerships? You have the technology down for that. You understand how that works. You run all your business, business systems, no problem. What happens if you come in and find out that for some of the more rural areas, they decided to go into short-term rentals of the cars? How would you support that? How would you support short-term rentals of the cars? What if you work for a department store? What if you start renting out handbags there? I don't know why you would, but what if you did? What would the technology implications be? What if you merged or acquired a related business and wanted to incorporate that into the way you automate your business processes today? Okay, so these are just wild examples, but this is all things that businesses are doing quite regularly to respond to these changing customer expectations that you as technology leaders are going to be required to meet. And if you don't know how you'd respond to those sorts of sometimes bizarre requests, because you don't have a playbook in place for that sort of bizarre request incorporation, then you're going to be caught unprepared. Might be a good exercise. In fact, several weeks ago, I was talking to a group of chief architects, and I suggested that they go back and actually do a little, it was right before April Fool's, I suggested they run an April Fool's prank on their teams. Go back and say, hey, surprise, we've been asked to do whatever, you know, something that is orthogonal, and see how your team reacts. You know, see what the thinking processes are, see who the leaders are, see what emerges, and then, you know, react accordingly so that you really are prepared when something real comes your way. How many people in this room have had to respond to something off the wall? Well, that's everybody, right? New business lines, you know, new ways of doing business, new business models. Just a handful. Yeah, that's interesting. There will be more. There will be a lot more. And by the way, you may not have to respond to it. You may be the one suggesting it, because you may be better prepared to suggest and to understand what the capabilities are that could be a business enabler. So the other thing that's happening, of course, solutions are becoming more targeted, more personalized. I'm not necessarily just talking about experiences here. We've been talking about personalized experience for a long time. The solutions themselves for consumers and for companies are becoming very targeted. And we know how to do that, but oftentimes we stop at the limits of what our level of access to relevant data, where that stops us. There is going to be data available to us that we don't necessarily understand or anticipate that will allow for levels of personalization that has not been in play yet. So if you are just assuming that you'll have access to the same old data that you have today, master data, transactional data, maybe some data that you get from other sources, and that's how you're going to personalize products or capabilities that you're going to serve to your customers, you're going to be caught, again, unawares. So please be thinking. I'll give you an example. A couple weeks ago, I was at the University of Tennessee. I'm an advisor to their EE and CS department. And one of the professors was talking about this device that she's created. It's pretty interesting. It's a device that she's created that plugs into a wall. And this, you know, she has plugged these devices into many, many, many walls. And what it does is communicates back with her and tells her what the electricity usage is, not only in the structure in which it's plugged in, but the surrounding area. So using this method and hundreds of these devices, she's created a grid across the United States. And the reason she does this is so that she can help predict where outages are about to occur, overloads, and that she can help the utilities respond and avoid disaster. But the thing that she shared that I thought was interesting is she can actually, during the Super Bowl, for example, tell you when the commercials are on, because electricity spikes all over, because people get up, they open the refrigerators, or they, flush the toilet, and the water pump starts working. And these little spikes in electricity are telling her per region, how many people are really watching the Super Bowl. Now, I don't know whether or not your company really cares to know that sort of information, but here's some information that she did not gain by going out and talking to all the utilities. This is information she gained by putting some boxes out in people's houses and offices and so on, and is reading through that sort of device, through interaction with the device. Does your company need this sort of information? I don't know, but it's an example of the type of information that sitting here we may not be able to easily think about being available to us in terms of customizing products and solutions for our customers, but this sort of information and much more will be available to us this time next year. We haven't even imagined yet, or this time in 2 years. We certainly haven't imagined yet. So prepare for additional information coming in, and be prepared to leverage that information when it's available to you. And the last thing I want to say about customer expectation shifting is, of course, corporate customers no longer just want a price list of goods from you, right? How many people in here have customers that are corporations? Not as many, about a third. Okay. Corporate customers want, they want solutions that are obviously tailored to them, but also that offer them the best value over time. They want to know that you understand their business very, very well. Now, companies cannot do that sort of tailoring if the IT department isn't prepared to provide that. Because the other thing that your company is going to want to know is how can the solution that you're offering, the best value solution that you're offering to a client, how can that also be the best value for your company? And figuring that out, figuring out what is an optimal mix for your company and for their company over time, heavy IT componentry, and it requires, again, a level of awareness that may not be provided by traditional methods of running IT. Again, if you guys who are architects, I hope that some of this is, I know, I can see it, some of this is resonating. And as mentioned earlier, again, the people who are going to be on top in the next week, the next year, 2 years, they're going to be the companies who have figured out how to harness the information, the massive amounts of information that's in place. So how many people, see, I get to learn a little bit from you guys too, because this is a very enriching experience for me to be in a room with all of you. So I'd love to know how many people in here have data or information in their titles, or direct responsibility for, a couple, thank you for representing there in the back, all right. Direct responsibility for data, like massive amounts of it. Very, very few. I mean, a good, think about, and that's a problem I see in architecture and how we've organized ourselves lately, just in general across the industry. We tend to segment. We tend to take architects, and this is part of what we've done as we've globalized architecture. We tend to take architects and say, you're an enterprise architect, you're a software architect. The closest we get to someone with a broad responsibility base are people who sometimes are referred to as solution architects, but we like to take our infrastructure guys and put them over here, and data, data people over here. But architects cannot do their job and cannot be effective without a strong, deep understanding of how data is managed, how it should be managed, what the capabilities and prospects are, what the opportunity is. So I encourage all of you, by the way, if you haven't, find out who the people are in your organization that run the data infrastructure, that are responsible for data strategy, and see what you can learn from them. And if you can't learn anything from them, start teaching them. And of course, the other thing that we're having to focus on as architects are finding ways to enable our business to get into the conversation that is happening in social networks that, of course, allows us to be part of the decision-making process for our customers. And this is only going to become more and more prevalent as time goes on. not only do we have to worry about in our IT shops having ownership and not only ownership, but also the actual existence of our capabilities that run our IT shop distributed around the world or distributed logically, so do our customers. So again, understanding your large enterprise customers and understanding how you're going to hook up how you're going to fit into the overall environment, that is, of course, of great concern to all architects. Mobility is changing again. We know, again, this is back to the conversation we had about data being available to us that wasn't in the past. We now know where a lot of our folks are. How many people out there have an app that is part of the company that you support that will tell you where your customers are, the people who have the app? Yeah, a handful. I mean, you have to tell them that you're going to be tracking where they are, right, and what you're going to be using that information for, but not many. I mean, a lot of people do. There's data out there. I mean, location-based information and apparently information about when you're getting up and opening your refrigerator that other companies have, right? And if you don't have it, two things. Number one, start investigating how you can get your hands on it if it's meaningful to you. And number two, start preparing to use that sort of data when it is available to you. If you don't, you find yourself in a couple years being behind. You don't want that. Security considerations continue to evolve. How many of you, I know in my organization, I have people who I hold responsible for understanding security. I also lump them in with the people who understand regulatory requirements and the like. And I will be the first to admit that I'm not sure that that is an optimal model. I think it's a very common model. I believe that what we're going to need to see in the next year, 2 years, is going to be a shift in responsibility, so that, or maybe a distribution of responsibility is a better way of putting it, so that we end up with, as architects, as general architects, more direct responsibility for security. I mean, most of us have the head on our shoulders, sort of know the sorts of things we should and shouldn't do, but I'd like to see formal responsibility more distributed. I think this will be good for not only the responsibility we have as architects to our customers and to our companies, but also the responsibility we have to our, depending upon where you're located in the world, you have responsibility to your country, government. There are requirements coming in from all sources, right? Something that all architects have to understand. I don't think we've done a good job as a community making that pervasive, and I don't expect economic conditions to be any less volatile along the way. We're going to have, unfortunately, natural disasters and recovery from the financial meltdown and political unrest that's going to continue to hit us. So, before we get started, talking about the change in the role of the architect and how that's going to impact us, any questions or comments? No one has a comment? We have all these nice mics. Is it a bunch of hooey? Have you seen it? Have you not seen it? All right, so it's pretty much the reality that I'm seeing across the sample size that I've taken. Each one of us as architects, or as people who are stakeholders in architecture practices, are going to be responsible for making sure that the architecture practice evolves in support of all the things we've talked about today. It's no one else's responsibility. It's not like there's some big organization in the sky that's going to change what architects do. There is tremendous opportunity right now, and there's great appetite in most businesses for enhanced engagement of architects. One thing that we're going to see, I think, more of is this notion of the lone architect, or the age of accountability will return. Years ago, we had architects that were single architects for a domain, and they sort of emerged over time, having been developers or sysadmins or whatever, and they just happen to know a lot about whatever business system they're aligned with, and that was okay. That was fine. What you're going to see as IT departments shrink, as business considerations start to play more heavily in how architects engage, you're going to start to see individual architects functioning outside of teams. This means that level of accountability and how you operate is going to have to change significantly. How many people here are lone architects today? Nice. How many people here are lone architects in companies in the Fortune 50? Yeah. There you go. So you're on the cutting edge, my friend. The other thing that I'm seeing is architects are moving into the business community. I mean, the business community, even if you haven't formally segmented IT, some of the first jobs that I see being hired directly into businesses are architecture jobs. So the cool thing is that our business constituents now know what architects do, and that's wonderful. That's a huge success for the industry, for the profession. But, not but, and it's also an opportunity for us as architects and for the profession to become real business leaders. So imagine that you are sucked out of your IT organization or out of your service organization, and you're put side by side with the president of one of your business units. You now attend his or her staff. Are you prepared? Are you prepared to talk the language of your business unit? You should be. If you're not, these are things that we're going to talk about in a minute, the sorts of things you should be considering. So how many people are familiar with the foundational capabilities as they've been defined by the ISA? Handful of people? Okay, so do you know what the ISA is? All right, so it's the International Association of Software Architects. It's a profession of architects. It has, I don't know how many tens of thousands of members around the world. And, whether or not you care for a professional organization, this particular group's done a lot of good work around capability mapping. So they've determined what, and by the way, they haven't sat in a tower and done this. This is something that they organized and had thousands of people through chapters all around the world contributed to this. And long story short, ended up with this notion of 5 foundational capabilities that all architects must have. So what I'd like to talk about now is, I'll tell you what these are, since there didn't look like there's a lot of familiarity in the room. We'll talk about what they are, and then I'd like to talk about how each one of them is going to change or evolve to meet the needs of what we've just been discussing. And these are probably areas that you need to focus on if you haven't already. So first area is design. Of course, it's easy to understand that regardless of whatever type of architect you are, whether you're an enterprise architect, whether you're a software architect, infrastructure architect, you have to have an understanding of design. You have to understand what methodologies are available to you, what tools are available to you, what notation you're going to use, what your approach is, what the relevant patterns are. For your area, your domain, you have to have design skills, right? Everyone buys that. The other foundational skill is this notion of quality attributes. This is an abstraction from design of the notion of management and optimization for ilities. So, you can have a brilliant design that is, gorgeous, but if you have inappropriately optimized for extensibility over performance, then it is a bad design. So this is the idea that, you know when to optimize for what ility, agility, resiliency, whatever, and you've built that into what you're producing. The third area, foundational capability, is IT environment, because you can have a great design that has optimized for all the ilities appropriately, but if you don't know how to roll it out in your environment and you've missed the testing window and you don't understand how what you're putting out is going to impact everything else, then obviously it's a failure. So understanding IT environment is key. The fourth is this notion of business technology alignment, because you can have nailed the first 3, but if you have delivered something that doesn't provide the value or the benefit that the business wanted, you failed. So that's the idea. And of course, there's a lot of meat behind each one of these 4 areas. And if you haven't taken a look at the ISA website and figured out what these 4 areas entail, you might want to. When I owned architecture for Dell, all of my architects went through this. We had 100 people go through this training. It was very good. And then the last area is human dynamics, because you could have nailed the first 4, but if you can't explain it to anybody, you can't influence anybody, you're of limited value to the company. And then, of course, the considerations that you had in building out a solution may be suspect if you're not a good listener and understand how to extract meaning from your business and stakeholders and so on. So those are the 5 foundational elements. So now let's talk about how each one of those, or what the focus areas within each one of these should be based on all the things that we just talked about, the changing business considerations, what's happening inside of IT. Does that sound good? Okay. So when you think about design, I'm going to lump design and quality attributes into one for the purpose of this. Understanding impact has become a lot more complicated. Because impact no longer is just within your area. I mean, just within your environment. Sometimes now your solutions are, multi-environment, right? They're not even owned by you necessarily. Understanding optimal SLAs across across multiple providers and tracking the environmental behavior. All of these things are not things historically part of, or at least not centrally part of, what we did in our design work. Maybe part of it, but this is going to be central to what we're doing. Let me give you an example. I have a friend, a colleague at Dell, who has a friend who works for a large multinational hotel chain. Everyone in here would recognize the name. I mean, it's total brand name hotel chain. They have 22 people in their IT department. It's crazy. They have 22 people in their IT department. The architects, and by the way, more than one is an architect. So that's great. That's great news for architects. Architects play heavily in how they run their 22-person IT department. They've outsourced infrastructure. They leverage SaaS-based solutions very heavily. They are a great example of how some of the the new trends are being applied. Those architects and how they do design, I suspect, is not necessarily the same activity we're used to when we think about architects doing design work, right? It's a new central focus. Any questions or comments about this? I know y'all are so surprised to see words on a slide for me. It just it boggles the mind. Of course, we learn about your IT environment. As architects, to try to be effective in whatever it is we're delivering becomes a little more complex for all the reasons we've already discussed. Understanding what questions we need to ask, the same list of questions we carry into every single engagement is not going to be the same, that they're going to have expanded. If you don't know what those questions are going to be, think about them. You may already have done this, but if you haven't, go back and think about what sort of things you'd have to ask that maybe you aren't asking today. This is part of what we do, and we enhance our craft, and we help expand our job responsibilities. Managing interdependencies. If you don't have a formal method for managing interdependencies across your organization, you're going to be lost when it comes, the next year or 2 years, unless you just work in the smallest possible domain. I mean, this is a great time for you to step up and say, hey, this is how I think we should manage interdependencies, business and technology interdependencies going forward. This is how I'd like it to be tracked. This is how I'd like it to be governed. And I'm going to own this. It's a great opportunity to go out and do that. Obviously, testing considerations is part of that. How are you going to measure how adaptable or how efficient your solutions are now that your solutions are made up of components from all over the place? Yeah, I mean, you could wait for someone else to figure it out, but who better than the architects to come forward with a solution for this? So these are opportunities for leadership. These are opportunities for contribution, for changing the profession, for changing the engagement model for architecture. This is the time. There's an appetite for it. There's an opportunity for it. So if you haven't thought about these sorts of things, now's the time. And as we talk to our business communities, our business stakeholders, things have changed for them too. I mean, all the things that we just talked about, like the changing customer expectations and all the new types of services we have to provide to the customer, that's interesting to us. And we think about it in terms of, yes, we have to change our technology capability in support of this. But it's terrifying for our business partners, right? I mean, this is what they are directly held responsible for. Understand that you're going to have to go in and be the voice of reason to these stakeholders. Understand that they are going to be very grateful for you to come in and say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Things that may not be reasonable from a technology perspective for your business community to anticipate or to understand. You can go and offer that up. So now's the time. Again, there's an appetite for it. Go take the opportunity. You may be able to see the new capability that is going to allow you to leapfrog over your competition. So don't be shy about that. And the last thing I'll say down below, don't play the hero. Doesn't mean you can't be the hero. It just means that you don't want to swoop in and say, hey, I'm from IT, I've come to save the day, here are all of my great ideas. Be subtle about it, work with the business community, and be most impactful that way. And the other thing that's happening, just as the IT environment is changing and people no longer have the same jobs or roles, so do our business constituents and other stakeholders have different jobs and different concerns. And you have to be very, you have to understand and be able to read the very subtle differences in how our stakeholders are now incented and how they are motivated. These are changing. These are things that are going to impact how successful we are in supporting them as an IT community and certainly as architects. One thing I've learned and that I've coached a lot of architects when they go in to meet with our business leaders is to be brief. I don't know a lot of smart people who like to hear things explained to them more than one time. Sometimes I can't help myself. But sometimes, we as architects tend to be a little too verbose. So there are some things, again, how many people have this notion, have heard the notion of an elevator speech? Yeah, a handful of you. So anytime you go to any sort of communication class or how to be a successful leader in your organization, you will have introduced this notion of an elevator speech. The idea is be able to explain who you are, what you do, what your goals are, what your interests are in 2 minutes or less. And the reason it's called elevator speech is because the thinking is, what if you run into your CEO in the elevator? Here's your opportunity to give the pitch. So have it ready because you want to be ready for that pitch. And I always roll my eyes when I hear this because in theory it's a good idea, but first of all, that's never going to happen. But secondly, you don't have 2 minutes. There is no way that anybody is going to sit there and listen for 2 minutes as you rattle off a spiel. You have about 10 seconds. You have about 10 to 15 seconds. Now's a good time as you think about building out your communication capabilities and the things that you need to have in your repertoire and preparing for those key communications. Now's a great time to have the 10 to 15 minute spiel, not only for who you are, what you're working on, and how it impacts the business, but also for the key areas you want to champion. Have the 10-second, the 15-second version of the top 5 things you want to accomplish or that you want to pitch to somebody. Have those ready to go so that when you see someone in the hallway, you rattle it off. Or you see someone in the elevator, you're going to rattle it off, and you're not going to get stopped. You have at least 10 seconds. These are the sorts of things that now, in this time of change where the appetite is greater, be prepared. The last thing I want to say here, influence without passion. During times of stagnation, we as architects tend to use passionate pleas to win the hearts and the minds of organizations that are otherwise unwilling to invest and just want to keep the status quo in place. And we try to very passionately describe the possibilities, and we try to bring everybody along with us. Right now, in general, what I'm seeing is the business communities in large companies, medium-sized companies, are so, I don't want to say on edge, but there's so much change going on right now that coming through with a big passionate plea is probably not the best approach for change, for driving appropriate acceleration. Be the voice of reason, be calm, learn to influence without passion. And if you have any gaps in the last, so this is it, the last one, right? These are the 5 areas. If you have gaps in any of these 5 areas and you're an architect or an aspiring architect, or if you lead a group of architects and you recognize that you have gaps in the overall capability that you are fielding for your company, now's a great time to go out and find a way to fill the gaps. We can talk more later if you'd like some suggestions, or you can certainly go out to the ISO website and check out what they have. That's what I did for Dell. And so lastly, the opportunity is to recraft yourself and your offerings to the company. This is a great opportunity to redefine, as I mentioned, the practice of architecture. I mean, you can have great influence on the overall community right now because of what's happening. This is definitely not the time to sit around and wait and see what happens if you want to be a player. And lastly, everything that we're doing right now is going to have great impact. There's opportunity for swift and broad-reaching impact. So don't be shy. This is going to be a great time for all of us. So that's all I had for you today. Love to do a couple of things. I'd love to get questions. But barring that, what I thought I might do is stick around up here because we have some extra time. Maybe go off mic and do a little roundtable. For those of you who are interested in more of a give and take conversation in a smaller venue, After we go through some public questions, I'll just stick around up here and we can have a little roundtable discussion if you're interested. Any questions? Yes.
Could you speak to the skill sets that are going to get you farther in your what you're talking about?
Okay, so the question is, what skill sets are gonna get you farther in what you're talking about, and what we've talked about here today. First of all, we have to look at what technologies are leading the pack in solutioning a future state. Obviously, everyone here is familiar with, and again, it depends on what kind of company you're in. So if you're an internal IT person, you should be familiarizing yourself with the significant cloud-based offerings that are in your space today, how you might, how other companies are incorporating those solutions, what integration considerations you have across multiple cloud-based solutions. Those are the sorts of things that again, data, anything having to do with data management, because that's certainly something proprietary that may be specific to your organization. From a technology perspective, that's probably where you're going to focus, more integration, data analysis. From an impact perspective, if you're internal IT, you want to focus on communications, understanding your business, your constantly evolving business model, trying to figure out where it might be going next, even if it hasn't been announced. Start playing in the space a little bit more. Start making suggestions for how the business model can evolve. These are things, and again, providing a level of leadership to the overall organization at this time of turmoil is going to be tremendously valuable to your colleagues and to your stakeholders as well. Now, if you're working for a different type of company, if you're working for a company that provides SaaS-based solutions, then your area of expertise and the focus areas for you as an architect is going to be very different, right? You're going to focus on more of the what I would consider traditional architecture things. It's all about scalability, it's all about security, it's all about the sorts of things that we've focused on regardless of where we've worked historically. The big changes that I see are primarily for people who are running the IT shops, who are now consuming a lot of these breakout capabilities. Any other questions? Yes.
You talked about consumers and your example of the bakery and the website and comparing it to Amazon.
Right.
Seems like over the last couple of years, it's definitely been, being an internal IT person, it's been a real challenge of reacting quick enough to our internal customers, because their experiences with the web, their knowledge that they've gained over the last few years, and their expectations. Primary examples would be, well, my Google search returns my results immediately. Well, it doesn't, but that's their experience. And this other tools that they have access to themselves at home. Right. How do we set expectations and things like that?
That is a wonderful question from one internal IT person to another. These consumer class expectations that our business partners have are not going away. They're as savvy about consumer technology, especially in a company that sells consumer technology, as anyone, right? They're going to be, there is no way to take those expectations off the table. So the best thing you can do is, you play it a couple of different ways, and a lot of it depends, my disclaimer is it depends a lot on the personalities of the people that you're dealing with. But generically speaking, first, educate the users on the environment that you're supporting. Make it as cartoon-like and as easy to understand as possible. Here is the environment that we use to support you today. Here are the constraints. This is how we can invest to take these constraints away. This level of investment will be required. That means that the investment that we had allocated over here for these other business initiatives would go away in support of a better user experience internally. The question that you ask them is, what is the productivity gain of the investment going here? If you can create a case, if they can create a case for productivity gain and do this as nicely as possible. But the reality is, if the productivity gain is significant enough to offset the revenue opportunity that is represented by whatever strategic investment you were planning to make over here, then you have a case for enhancing the experience. The other thing you should do simultaneously, and this is not something you necessarily want to do transparently, is go out and think well outside the box. The solutions that you have in place that are in support of your daily business that your internal consumers are using today, you may be able to do something radically different with SaaS-based solutions, as we've incorporated many SaaS-based solutions inside of our corporate offering for our internal clients at Dell. Certainly, you may look at that sort of thing where you can very easily estimate cost, not only of implementation, but also of maintenance, and then perhaps go to the internal customers and say, hey, I've heard what you've said. I've investigated some solutions that are new. Here's what they are. Here's what they're going to cost. And then you have the discussion about what do you want to unfund? What do you want to take funding? Where do you want to get the funding? What goes below the line as a result of this? And then let it be their decision. If they're like, you know what? I can live with the clunky interface. Or maybe they're like, you know what? The clunky interface is costing us X number of dollars, and I can't live with it anymore. You'd be surprised what sort of reasonable conversations you can have with internal consumers when you start talking about it in terms of dollars. Oh, got a couple of other.
Of all the trends you talked about, one thing we hear a lot about now is the integration with operational technology. And so I wonder how that sort of consumerization of technology into the business how do you see that influencing the role of an architect as they're outward focused, not inward?
Okay, so let me make sure I understand your question. You're asking about the how the say it again.
Operational technology.
Operational technology.
Yep. How that is sort of a new trend that's spreading into more businesses, manufacturing floors, right? They're getting more operating systems, standards, integration needs. And so I was just wondering how you're seeing that changing the role.
Well, I mean, anytime you see the distribution of the engagement of your business, who I essentially would, the operations folks are essentially your business constituents, right? In this case, you will see architects in operations, just as you're seeing architects in, services, and you're seeing architects in all other parts of your business. You'll also see the architects that are serving internal IT having greater opportunities to influence. I mean, this can go either way, right, for an internal IT architect. You can either use this as an opportunity to have greater influence, right, because there will be a need that you can fill. And by the way, don't go out and say, what do you need? Go out and say, here's what you have. Here's how I can help you with this. I'm going to define an engagement that we can have going forward, so you bound it. I'm going to offer this to you. Or it could go badly for you, and you could end up not being engaged at all. And obviously, expertise is built out in other parts of the company that you will not have control over at all. Best if you engage early and define the nature of the engagement you'd like to have optimal for your case. It's a good question. Hi.
You mentioned the hotel chain.
Yes.
The big hotel chain that they changed the structure so they don't only have 20 IT personnel.
Yes.
What changed to the architects in their role in this
Great
organization?
questions. Great question. And
What's making them successful?
yes. And by the way, this person is next in the blue shirt, so I've got you. All right. So the question, of course, is, hey, in a situation we've got an internal IT organization that just shrunk down to 22 people, what's the architect actually doing? Well, architects are so. We overall, as corporate IT, I think we have probably boxed our architects into a place where they have been unable to be as impactful as they could be. Think about what an architect does. An architect has perspective that crosses multiple business functions, certainly boundaries within various technology implementations. They understand impact across the board. Something gets tweaked over here, an architect can tell you all the implications, right? This is a very unique, master-level architect, extremely unique resource. And what do we do with them? We typically put them in a little box, I have a friend here at Microsoft named Lewis Curtis who likes to call it the notion of a brain on a stick. They're a brain on a stick. We'll go ask them the tough questions, then, okay, go back to your corner. We adults are going to make the decisions here. I mean, we've done that organizationally to the architects. We've boxed them off and said, here's how you're going to. Now, the smart architecture organizations have come back and responded to that organizational construct with a formal engagement model that shows exactly how they're going to engage in the different types of things that IT departments do. And that has helped significantly. But we've done a bad job. What these smaller IT organizations are allowing to happen is architects can now break out of that organizational box that we've put on them, that constraint. And architects start playing more of the role that it was when most of us first became architects, which is this person who understands the business and person who understands all the technology, someone who can go very deep if necessary. Because think about it, if you only have 22 people running the IT organization, the IT capability of a multinational large hotel chain, what you're going to need to understand, I mean, you have to go toe-to-toe with every chief architect of every SaaS-based provider that you have. You need to go toe-to-toe with every infrastructure cloud-based provider that you have. You need to be able to understand all impacts. If somebody tweaks over here, how that's going to impact everything else you have going on in the environment, which, by the way, you no longer control. Your architects are going to have to I think that's an environment in which architects thrive. Now, interestingly, the other thing it does for architects are architects typically go up through the ranks, and they get to be a very senior, highly paid individual contributor. And then we sit them down, and we say, well, for career advancement, you can stay where you are, and you've pretty much topped out in the individual contributor role, or you can come over here, and you can become a manager. You can move laterally, and then you can work your way up the chain from there. And that's just what's done. And so if I had the conversation with one person, Angela, what should I do? What should I do? I've had it 1,000 times. This pretty much eliminates that, because guess what? The CIO of the organization has 22 people. It changes. By the way, I could have the same conversation and target CIOs, because we can no longer care about how many people we have in our organization as a measure of how influential we are. We still want to stand up in front of the board. We still want to have a seat at the table. But, we may only have 22 people. Or we may only have 100 people. We may only have 500 people instead of a 10,000 person organization. And that's okay. That actually means that we've been very successful as CIOs. Similarly, architects will be allowed to be successful and senior and influential regardless of whether or not you have anyone reporting to you. Because guess what? Everyone else isn't going to have a whole bunch of people reporting to them either. So you're an equal playing field. It's no longer, how am I going to measure you against this person with 150 people? I now know how. So I think it's only good. It's only goodness for architects. You're on.
I'll try. When you see, one of the first trends that you mentioned was IT departments becoming smaller. Mm-hmm. Do you see that they become smaller and also costs are being cut, or are costs simply being moved somewhere else?
Very good question. So the question is, when I see IT shops shrinking, are costs actually being cut? In other words, and or are costs just being moved? A little of both. IT shops have shrunk for two reasons. The first is costs are being cut. The first is you have taken the redundancy out of your your application portfolio. You have globalized and standardized, and you've created an environment that no longer takes an army to support. And so, keeping the lights on becomes much less expensive. And if you do not have strategic investment to make with the money you've saved, that would then keep busy all of the people who were keeping the lights on, then you would shrink your IT department. So that's one answer. The second answer is costs, even keeping the lights on costs, may be moved elsewhere in the case where we've outsourced. So much outsourcing. I mean, Dell is an outsourcing business, right? Dell Services, we manage, I don't know how many IT departments for mid and large size companies, and small size companies too. So we'll run the entire IT division for people. We'll, some cases we just run their data centers. Some cases we're a cloud provider, and we'll provide a cloud-based environment for them to leverage or that we will run for them. We provide full-on app support. We do a SaaS, it's not a Dell commercial, but I see customers all the time just leveraging Dell services because it's cheaper, it's more predictable, and I would imagine their IT departments get pretty small when they do that. So it'd be a shifting of cost in that case. But the hope is also a reduction of cost, an increase in agility, and all the goodness that goes with that. Yes.
So one of the trends that I've been seeing, at least in our organization, is the skill sets of our Tier 1 and Tier 2 folks dramatically being lowered. Is that something that you're seeing in your environment as well?
Yeah, not in my environment, because that would make me very upset. But I have seen some of that. The hope is that as you have an opportunity to rejigger how you run your IT shop, right? The hope is that you take the opportunity to raise the bar. Because if you're shrinking your IT shop, for whatever reason, the hope is that the people that you retain and the people you invest in are your top talent. And not only people who have done a good job and who are smart and hardworking, but also the people who possess the capabilities to take you to the next level. So when I run an organization, I think about the sorts of things I'm going to have to do. I think about the go-to-market capabilities I want to deliver. And I want to make sure the people I have in place not only are smart, hardworking with a good track record, but also can take me to where in the organization to where we need to go. So that's one of the reasons why it becomes more important to understand some of these trends that every IT leader is going to be concerned about, and incorporating that into your tool set so that you are the one providing that value. You're the one clearly driving the movement in the direction the business wants to see it go, or may not even know it wants to see it go yet. Any other questions?
Just made me think of consolidation, right? Are we all going to end up working for Dell or HP?
That is a great question, and I'll be reviewing resumes later today. So the question is, where are we going to be working? There's been some interesting studies and some interesting theories floated about that, and not just in IT, not just in technology. You look at the workforce and the expectations of the emerging workforce. People have expectations, especially those who are going to be dominant in the workforce in the next 5 years, which is the folks who fall into Generation Y category. The expectations of people in Gen Y are that they work from wherever they work. They work from wherever they are. Shouldn't be a problem from a technology perspective. Got the mobility solutions to support that. The only problem I see is, of course, just cultural shifts in the mindset of large companies that employ these people. Easy enough to fix, well, or not, but should be easy enough to fix. But what that sort of model, that highly distributed model, allows for is an evolution to something very different from what we have today. I've seen people come out and say, everyone's going to be an independent contractor. Everyone's going to be an independent contractor. Your capabilities will be, I don't know how many people here have participated in either as a consumer or provider in a crowdsourcing activity. So just a couple of people. All right, so let me tell you. I was talking to a colleague the other day whose wife's starting up a yoga studio. He said, yeah, she's got her logo, she's got her, everything, her brand is all set and all that. I'm like, oh, that's a big investment, because the last time I checked on doing something like that, it's thousands of dollars. He's like, oh, no. I went to, one of the crowdsourcing sites and basically posted up, this is what I need to have done. Here's my concept for, here's what I'm putting forward, a yoga studio where I come to your house and so on and so forth. Here's the type of person I am. And then whoever gives me the winning logo and branding package will get $500. And then, 2,000 submissions later, he had picked, he and his wife had picked 5 or 6 top folks, went back out to those 5 or 6 people, say, hey, you guys are the top ones. Here's my feedback on yours. They submitted one more time and ended up with, something that was a, very nice package for $500. I don't really want to work in an environment where I'm competing against thousands of people for $500 for a logo design. But it's an example of a business model that is taken off. I mean, if you can churn out these logo designs in 5 minutes, and you do, I don't know, how many a day? You work whatever hours you want to work. You just churn them out and get them in under the deadline. You have a certain percentage hit rate. You can make a decent living. Top Coder has an interesting, similar solution model that they've had in place for many, many years. They have design contests essentially, where their Top Coder clients will come to them and then say, here are my business requirements. Those business requirements will essentially be posted in a formal competition construct, and people will compete for design, for the solution design. There's a board of who evaluates the design for all of the whatever optimization goals you give them, elegance, extensibility, whatever. Then once the design is selected, that design is then put out there for round 2, which is the development competition, and all of these people come back with all these coders up late at night, all code it up and send it in, and then what you get back for a relatively small investment is a full-on design and implementation of a solution. Now this becomes a little more difficult when you start talking about these highly integrated, extremely complex, multi-component sort of solutions, but for something quick and dirty, it's a model that works. Again, do I want to play in that model? No, but if you won every competition you were in, I did sit down and figure out many years ago when I first became aware of the model, you could make 7 figures as a developer. So, I mean, conceivably. So maybe I do want to play in the model, I don't know. Maybe I'm in the wrong business. But there are all sorts of models that will emerge over time, and which direction it's going to go, I don't know. I do know it's not going to remain the same. We will not continue working for large corporate IT entities, just as we have been historically. There will be a lot of outsourcing. So yes, we may very well end up all working for one of the providers, unless, but if you're an architect, you could probably write your own ticket. You can go work for a provider, or you can go work for the business community. You could run the technology division. You can become a CIO. You can do whatever you want because you're an architect. You've got the vision, you've got the capability, you have the background, you have the foundational skills. You can write your ticket. So regardless of where this goes, regardless of the trends go, now's the time to make the right preparations to succeed in whatever model we're going to be faced with. Any other questions? All right, so let's see here. We have about 10 minutes left. So if you want to come up and have I'm going to turn off the mic. You want to come up and have a small conversation.